right. Hunter Miranda, welcome to Left Out Loud. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for the work you do. It is so needed and important. So, very grateful to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hunter, you are running for Congress in the 47th District of California. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, that is like the southern county of Orange County. It's like in the southernmost portion of Orange
Exactly.
County on the coast.
Yep, exactly. So after Prop 50, which was the proposition that kind of reorganized the districts this last
Hmm.
election, we're now inclusive of cities like Irvine, Laguna Beach, Dana Point, up into Tustin.
Ooh.
So kind of that whole southern swath of southern Orange County, like you mentioned, onto the coast of Laguna Beach and Dana Point. So yeah.
I should have worn my Dana Point hoodie. I was there a
Ah,
couple of years ago.
perfect.
Had I known, I didn't know Dana Point was in there now.
Yeah.
So Hunter, tell us about, first of all, I've always kind of thought of Orange County as traditionally or historically a red county. I know that maybe that's not so much the case now, it's more purple. Is that true? Like, what are you seeing? What's kind of the voting trends happening
Yeah.
in Orange County these days?
Yeah, you're totally right. So if there was for a long time, that was kind of the Republican stronghold in California. The majority of the seats, the congressional seats in Southern California specifically, were Republican held. That's basically completely flipped over the last 30 years. So now we see the majority as Democrats, especially after Prop 50. There's essentially one Republican district left,
Wow.
which even now has a lot of contention going on. If anyone's listening that lives in the California's 40th district, I'd highly recommend looking into the primary that's going on right now. That one's going to be very interesting. But now, like I mentioned, it's shifted a lot. And for example, we've seen a lot of voices really demanding, and this is not just something in Orange County or even California, but across the country, where people are realizing that the status quo in politics as usual is exactly the thing that got us into these situations that we're in now, and realizing that we need to be electing different types of leaders that aren't beholden to the same systems that have got us here. So that's something that we've seen, which we've been very fortunate enough to be a part of this wave of people wanting to step up and bring about that change. So that's something that we've seen in the district and obviously across the country as well. So it's very exciting in that regard.
Very exciting. Seth, did you have a question? You want to go next?
Yeah. I mean, right now we got to go. I got to go hard off the top, right? I'm coming off the top rope
Yeah.
because we have just had something happen in the Supreme Court where we have gutted parts of the Voters' Rights Act. It looks like red states are moving very quickly to redraw their districts. Louisiana is literally delaying their election, their primaries that are already in motion, right? All votes are already cast. They are delaying that election now to redraw these districts. Who knows what will happen with those votes? Who knows if people die, will those votes be honored now? This is insane. And, my home state of Alabama hopped on the train too. Looks like Tennessee will join,
Yep.
Louisiana as well. So I just
Florida
need to
just
know
passed theirs
because
down.
like this is not our father's Democratic Party, and I feel like at this moment we have to be aggressive. We have to fight fire with fire, and I just need to know how you feel about redistricting in general, and just what we need to do to meet this moment.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, this is not politics as usual. This is exactly why we need new types of leadership that are willing to take bold steps to prevent these things from happening. So, for example, one of the policies that we've been pushing strongly for is a complete national ban on gerrymandering, which would essentially prevent the states from doing it in the manners that they have been, where you see the most ridiculous districts being drawn that have nothing to do with geography, have no consistencies, and are solely there to pocket certain political parties and ensuring that they win those elections. And we've seen as a reaction to what the Republicans have done, we've seen, in California, New York is in the process of all these and other Democratic states to try and counterbalance that. But in order to address it directly at the federal level, there has to be a national ban, and that's something that we will be pushing for. In addition to that, there's things that can be done at the state level. For example, we as Democrats need to emphasize the vital importance of winning state elections. That's something that the Republicans have done very well over the last 20, 30 years, and they've secured a lot of power in those state houses, which ultimately are the ones by the Constitution, the ones that write the district maps and draw these things, which is why we see them drawn in such partisan ways. So we have to address that at the state level, and then at the federal level, making sure that we're working towards a national ban.
Yep. I think that that's a great point. I see, Democrats are starting to wake up to the state game. I've heard some states talking about potentially banning Citizens United at the state level, and enshrining that into their state constitutions. So I hope that we continue to do that. It's just, we really don't have a choice at this point, but to try and make every possible change in, states that have a blue majority. So Hunter, don't be angry with me. If you've ever watched the podcast, or if you go back and watch previous episodes, one thing I always say, or I have said several times, is I'm tired of seeing attorneys and executives running for political office. You are an attorney, however, you do state and municipal law, correct?
Yes.
And then also, this is what I like about you, Hunter. So, I dug deep on you. You do some pro bono immigration work as well. Can you talk to me about, there couldn't be a better time for pro bono immigration attorneys right now. It's so needed, I'm sure, across the country, but especially in California. So can you talk to me a little bit about the work you're doing there?
Yeah, no. So I've had the great fortune of being able to work with the Immigration Justice Campaign. And one thing that they do is work to get people that are going through the immigration process, whether that be, people that just arrived or people that have been detained by ICE, kind of the whole breadth of the immigration process that people can go through. Obviously now with the things that we've been seeing with ICE, with just obvious blatant constitutional violations, the intense policing that we've seen across the board, across the country, when it comes to ICE, families being torn apart, people living in fear, even immigrants that are here legally are living in fear because of the things that ICE are doing. People that are full citizens are living in complete fear. This is something that obviously cannot occur. And one of the things that specifically in the immigration field, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but one thing that we are pushing for in our campaign is the abolition of ICE, being the fact that ICE was developed as a post 9/11 entity when we were willing to give up so many of our constitutional rights after the fear that was stirred up after 9/11. And that's one of the things that we need to do when we completely overhaul our immigration system. But back to the pro bono work, like you mentioned, it's so important that people have that legal representation. And that's often one of the largest barriers that people go through, is that, for example, if you have a family member that's picked up by ICE out of the blue, one, you might not even know for a few days that where they actually are, whether or not they're even detained, if they're alive or not. After that, you have no idea what their legal status is, whether or not they're going to be immediately deported, or whether or not what that process actually looks like. You as a family member are obviously not going to have experience in the legal profession and know what that system is going to be, especially with the craziness of the Trump administration, where things are being changed just on the dime, basically every week. So you need that legal representation to ensure that your constitutional rights are being protected, which every person in the United States has a constitutional right to due process, which is something that the Trump administration has violated countless times. And one of the things that is why people need that proper representation. And often, unfortunately, even when they do have that representation, it still results in their constitutional rights being violated, and XYZ, the consequences of that. So I am very fortunate to be part of that. It's just a small thing to help contribute to this massive problem that we need to address at the systemic level. We can't just rely on attorneys trying to do what they can. It has to be addressed by us completely overhauling our immigration system, focusing it on humanity, safety, and fairness, rather than the cruelty that we see now, and which is just objectively unjust and unfair. So yeah.
Agreed. So I apologize. You get an exemption, right, from my former proclamation that attorneys should not run for office because, I mean, let's be honest, Hunter, you've taken all of that education and hard work that you put into your law degree and you're using it to give back to your community. So hats off to you. I think that's wonderful work that you're doing.
I appreciate that. And yeah, that's the thing. There's so much power that people in these positions of, privilege can do. And I obviously having the opportunity to go to law school, we have to utilize that privilege and that power to help those that don't have that and help as many people as possible with that. And I think that's one thing.
I love that. I wish all attorneys thought like you. That's wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, there's a lot that are solely there for the money and stuff, which, everyone each their own, but there is a lot of power that can come with those positions. And that's, obviously not just me, but there's so many people across the board that are actively working to do those things. So it's refreshing to see that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's great to hear because, it's difficult to live in America, to pay bills in America, especially in a state like California, and you would know about that for sure. And the Democratic Party going forward looks like the platform is going to be, number one on the docket is affordability, right? And that's the big name. That's the big word out there. What are you doing within your campaign, and what do you plan to do if you're elected to continue this movement for affordability across the country, and particularly in your state of California, where it's difficult to make life affordable?
Exactly. No, that's an amazing question because, like you said, that is at the forefront of so many people's mind. The simple fact that people can't afford to live, people that are working full-time jobs, sometimes 2 to 3 jobs, and they can't even afford to feed their families, pay their rent, send their kids to good schools and feed them healthy foods. Like the most basic standard things we need to live in the richest country on earth is just complete insanity that we've gotten to this point. And one of the biggest things one of the main reasons why we wanted to get involved in this race and actually challenge an incumbent Democrat who's been toe and heel with the establishment is that our entire economic system has essentially been monopolized by massive multinational corporations that prevent us from having true fair competition in our economy. And that's why people can't afford to live. That's why you see, for example, since 2020 alone, 50% of inflation has been directly tied to just corporate profiteering. So the fact that these companies can simply raise their prices because there's no fair competition, and that's something that's occurred over the last 30, 40 years under both Democratic and Republican leadership. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party has also been beholden to that big money that they spend to get people elected to do their bidding. And that's one thing that we've been calling out. And one thing which is why it's so important to have alternative news sources like you all is that people actually talk about that here. If you go to a mainstream media outlet, name the list of all the names that we know, you're never going to hear people talking about the fact that those companies are monopolies, the fact that basically every major industry is completely monopolized because we aren't properly enforcing and updating our antitrust and anti-corruption laws. And that's something that Congress has to be willing to do, and we have to have members that are actually willing to call that out. Otherwise, we'll just keep seeing the same exact things play out. So, for example, if we want to just keep electing the same exact types of Democrats that'll keep voting in the same exact way, we're going to end up in these same systems. Or if we're willing to elect leaders that are unbought from those positions or, unbeholden to those companies or those donors and move the needle in a new direction, that's, I think, what's the most important thing.
I agree. I mean, the Democratic Party, we are not blameless in getting us, into how we arrived at this situation. And, we can't keep hearing like the lesser of two evils, both parties are the same. We're not. We certainly have a better track record than Republicans on a lot of these things, but not good enough. It's not good enough. And I feel like, we are gaining for the first time in a really long time, all of this progressive momentum because people are just tired.
Exactly.
And they're tired of the establishment kind of owning our government, our politics, and also they're just becoming more aware of it, right? It's
Exactly.
impossible to ignore at this point.
And so
So,
real quick to that point, sorry, I want to emphasize that because you're completely right. The Republican Party has been completely dominated by MAGA and Trumpism and has obviously been shown to be a direct threat to our Constitution and to our country. And I in no way equate that to the Democratic Party.
yeah,
But with that being said, in order for us to win elections and actually prevent that from what we've seen, we've lost to Donald Trump twice, and we need a
yep,
wake up call. We need to
agreed.
realize that the strategies and the policies that we've been running on are clearly not enough. Like you said, it can't just be good enough. We have to be so much better. We have to be delivering for working class people. We have to be showing tangible results where we can, people can wake up the next day and say, here's an improvement in my life that's been made because of these policies, rather than just, catchphrases and slogans, which unfortunately we hear a lot of without any actual specific policy behind it. I completely agree. That is such a good point, that we need to build the strongest Democratic Party possible. And in order to do that, we have to break up, the influence of big money in our politics and call out our own party that is also beholden to that. We have to be willing to, call out the Democrats that are not willing to make those bold progressive steps and move the country in the right direction. So we have to be doing that to build the strongest party possible, knowing that we have to defeat Republicans that we're running against.
Couldn't agree more. And if we are able to do that as a party, or at least the majority of the party, we'll never lose another election. It's really that simple.
I completely agree.
And so some of the largest corporations, they're in these monopolies, they're the ones who are investing in these data centers and AI, right? Like they're the ones who stand to gain the most from moving to AI and laying off people in favor of AI, thinking that, they'll get a similar or better result than hiring actual humans. I just feel like we have to get out in front of this before it gets out of control. Bernie Sanders has been very vocal about it, and I'd like for you to tell everybody on our platform, what your plan is to get ahead of it. To talk about like the training that you want to do with people in terms of preparing people for the future, because this is coming whether we like it or not. But it's on us to do it responsibly and to not let it get out of control.
Exactly. And this is such a perfect example of how government works as a whole. The idea that our government has been so far behind the ball when it comes to AI regulation, and what, like you just said, this is going to be something that drastically changes the course of human history, if we're being totally honest. And if we as the United States government aren't 10 steps ahead, there's no way we're going to be able to catch up. And right now we have so much catching up to do, which is why it's so important that we have leaders that can actually understand this new era of technology. If you have people that are 90 plus years old that don't even know how to use a phone, it's really hard for people to comprehend that type of technology and how best to regulate that. And most importantly is, like you mentioned, that these companies are the ones that are paying to fund a lot of the campaigns of these politicians, paying to help lobby them to write laws that are beneficial to them. And one thing as legislatures is the most important thing that is part of the job, is making sure that the legislation that's passed is actually beneficial for the people of our country, not just private corporations that are able to make trillions of dollars at the expense of the people of our country. So you mentioned data centers. That's a huge issue where you see these data centers that are complete based environmental nightmares. They disrupt job markets. There's so many implications that can come from that. But on the flip side, we have to realize that this is the future, that we have to be prepared for what this is going to bring, and have policies that are built in to allow people to best integrate into that system. So you also mentioned, job training and moving the job sectors into this new era of things, this new era of technology, and ensuring that people have the proper resources to, whether that be transition to a new job or get the training to enter into the workforce into these types of jobs, and realizing that there's going to be a massive shift from labor intensive work that ideally can be use AI systems can ideally do themselves, to a shift to more of, managerial positions, or, whatever that may look like, realizing that we're going to have that big shift in the workforce, and being ready for that. And then having discussions about things like universal basic income and things, that would help alleviate our society if that big economic shift occurred. And just making sure that we are actually engaging in these conversations, working with the experts to develop the best way forward, rather than just playing catch up like we currently see.
Yeah, and I just want to add a little footnote to that. China just passed a law that you cannot replace workers with AI to save money. So,
Wow.
America, hey,
Yeah, that sounds great.
right. I thought China was the
Wow.
boogeyman, but they're making sure, right, that their people are going to be protected from being replaced by AI, and I think that's really commendable. Um, okay, so Hunter, I looked through, I went to your website, looked at your platform. Something that jumped out at me, which I think is personal to you. You are part of the Choctaw Nation, and you talked about tribal relations in your platform. Tell me what that looks like to you. How does that play out from a from a policy perspective?
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest things that I think a lot of people can agree that the federal government has failed since the inception of our country, obviously, is the relations with tribal nations in our country. And unfortunately, something that we've seen for decades now is essentially kind of the erasure of the fact that there are over 700 tribal nations within the United States that have diplomatic relations with the United States. And these are sovereign nations that, like I said, have diplomatic ties with the United States. And people don't really understand that or can comprehend really what that means and the complexities that go into that. So, for example, as a tribal citizen of the Choctaw Nation, I am able to vote in those elections and participate in that governance, as well as the United States. So that's
Oh,
applicable to basically, obviously, every other person that's a tribal member in the country. And
mm-hmm.
one thing that we've failed to do as a country is to actually uphold the treaties that we've signed with these tribal nations. So one of the big things that we will be working on is basically a revitalization of what those partnerships mean, to ensure that the people of those tribal nations who are American citizens have
Yeah.
everything that they need. So one of the big issues we see on tribal reservations and tribal nations is the lack of access to clean water, for example, healthcare services, economic opportunities, internet, electricity. There's some nations, the Navajo Nation, for example, is working on a big project to expand electricity to all of their people. So this is, these are people that need these essential things to live, and something that the United States has fundamentally failed to deliver on. One of the biggest things that I think is most exciting is integrating Indigenous knowledge into our environmental practices, whether that be, agricultural things or fire prevention or flooding or drought retention. There's so many things that these little experts in the places that they're from know how to deal with these environmental things and have been dealing with them for thousands of years, and being able
Right.
to use that Indigenous knowledge. So, for example, in California, with the fires that we have a huge issue with, we have tribal nations here that have been begging to work with state governance or even local governments to say, hey, we've been doing these things for thousands of years and no way to
Yeah.
prevent these things. And that's just one example. So that's one thing that I think the government, you never really hear talked about, and one thing we need to do a better job of addressing. But yeah, so that's one thing I'm incredibly proud of, that I get to be a part of that and working with those tribal nations and tribal leaders to make that a reality.
I love that.
I lived in North Carolina for most of my life before I moved back to Alabama for school, and we just over a year ago, Hurricane Helene came in, historic flood, and when you talked about how the tribes have been trying to work with California to work on something that they've been seeing for thousands of years, the same tribes on our side on the East Coast
Yeah.
were telling people, don't build these roads by these rivers. We've seen this before.
Mm-hmm.
You're not gonna like where this ends up, because every once in a while there's a flood and everything gets washed away, and it is such a failure of our government to not consult with our tribes who have been here from the beginning. Been on
Exactly.
this land
It's
from
so
the beginning
ignorant
and
and
know
arrogant.
the weather, right?
Yeah.
The arrogance. They
Yeah.
know the geography, the weather, and to not consult them on ways that they have been remedying, disasters for millennia. And
Exactly.
and it just blows me away. Blows me away. It's crazy. I had to mention that because it's just like, duh. It's such a
Yeah.
duh thing, but what are you gonna do? Old white folks, right? So you're a millennial like I am, and and one of the biggest problems facing millennials is that we are now the largest voting bloc in the country, and it feels weird to say that, but we are still one of the least housed uh, adult generations in the country, and housing has been very difficult to come by in terms of owning. A lot of us are still renters. Nothing wrong with that, but the American dream is to have your own piece of land, right? Little something to call home, a house. And housing is a big part of your platform. And speaking to the biggest voter bloc, the millennials, what is your plan? What are some steps that you're taking to ensure that we can have more home ownership across the country, just here in
Yeah.
America?
No, exactly. That's, like you said, one of the biggest issues, especially in Southern California. That's a massive issue. The idea of someone growing up here, for example, my parents bought a house in the mid 90s. They were able to get a really good price on it, a really nice area, all that. The idea of someone at their age in their early 20s buying a house here is such a foreign concept now
Yep.
that it's completely unrealistic. And the fact that that's become the reality that people just default to as being like, oh, well, too bad, so sad. You just got to work harder. That's just not the case. Where you've seen the statistics of income levels versus the pricing, and they just do not match up at all. The pricing has just drastically outpaced what people are actually making in the state. And this is something that's not just applicable to Southern California. Obviously,
Right.
this is a national issue that we're seeing. And one of the biggest problems that is actually particular to Southern California, but also obviously the nation, is that we've seen institutional investors coming in and buying up these single family homes, pricing out actual single families, and then those are basically massive conglomerates that buy out the housing market, and we've seen them increasing the percentages of single family homes that they've been buying basically every single year. So one of the things we want to do to directly address that is put a complete cap on the amount of homes that institutional buyers can buy, so that they can't come in and say there's a single family that just scraped up enough money to put down a down payment, then suddenly an institutional buyer comes in with a cash payment that's an additional 30 grand. Obviously the seller's going to take that offer, and that's something that's been really affecting single families. This is on top of one of the biggest things is actually increasing the supply, obviously, which is vitally important in order to reduce those prices, but not just increasing the supply in the traditional ways that we've been doing them, making sure that these are the communities that we're building are communities that are actually allow people to afford to live there. So that's moving more towards integrated housing, where there's different types of housing in a different area, integrating that with market communities, all these different things that we can be doing to ensure that these are actually going to be affordable housing, rather than just the fairy tale dream we're often sold. So yeah, that is obviously a massive issue and something that needs to be at the top of mind for anyone. So
Yep, absolutely. All right. I don't want to take up too much more of your time because you have the busiest weekend ahead of you that you've had so far at all of your campaign, which we'll talk about in a second. But every guest we bring on the podcast, I have to ask the same question to. I already know the answer, but we like to hear it out loud. So, Hunter Miranda, do you take any corporate PAC money?
I do not. We are incredibly proud to be 100% grassroots funded.
And no foreign interest money, no APAC money, all grassroots, right?
Yep, no
We love
foreign
that.
interest, no APAC, and that's something that we plan to do that's what we pledged to do from the beginning of our campaign through the entirety of it. Sometimes there's people that's like to say that at the beginning, and then suddenly right
Yeah.
at the end, they suddenly get a
They
bunch of
need that
influx of
boost.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, we are incredibly proud, and that's something that we're working to tackle is campaign finance reform, I think, has to be the number one priority for so many campaigns. Because if you don't address the root cause of actually who we get elected to change all the other laws that we've just talked about, then nothing's going to actually change. So we have to change where this money's coming from, who's able to fund these campaigns, that increase the transparency of that, and open a public option. There's a list of things that we can be doing to really reform how we elect people, and that's something that has to be called out and addressed directly. But yes, we're very fortunate to be 100% grassroots.
Love to hear that. Okay, so before we wrap up and you talk to everyone about how they can find you and what you need to help support your campaign, tell us, Hunter, why this coming weekend is going to be the busiest weekend of your campaigning so far.
Yeah, so ballots drop in 3 days now. So May 4th is when ballots come out in California. So if anyone hasn't registered to vote, you have until May 18th in California to register. So be sure to do that before that deadline. You'll then be either sent a mail-in ballot, or you can go in person to vote. You can also take in your mail-in ballot to the in-person place if you want to do that as well. So you have plenty of time to still register, but make sure you're doing that. And like you said, this is going to be one of the busiest weekends of the campaign, because ballots drop in 3 days. We need to be doing everything we can to get the word out. So yeah.
Very exciting. Very exciting. We wish you obviously the best of luck in your campaign over this weekend. I hope a lot of people turn out, get to know you better. Hunter, what do you need in these final days before, the primary is on June 2nd, or that's the deadline, right, for voting in the primary? What kind of support do you need between now and then? Is it strictly donations? Are you looking for volunteers still? What kind of help can our audience provide, and where can they find more about you?
Yeah, so you can, on all social medias, we are Hunter Miranda 2026. And then our website is huntermiranda2026.com. So all of our information's out there. You can follow us and see what we're doing on a daily basis with the campaign. You can also go to our website to check out our whole policy platform, where we really dive deeper into a lot of these really big issues, and how we actually, on day one, plan to be pushing specific policies that can deliver for working class people in this country. And one of the biggest things we need now is just people's support across the board. So whether that be something like a comment on a social media post, obviously donations are a big thing, being that we are fully grassroots funded. Any amount helps, even if it's something as small as $1. That goes so far in helping us secure a victory for the campaign. And also, if anyone's in Southern California and wants to help knock doors, we are literally out every single day canvassing the area. So if anyone wants to volunteer, they can go to huntermiranda2026.com/volunteer, fill out our form. We'll get you on board. We'll get you set up. We also have phone banking opportunities. If anyone, so even if you're not in the district and want to help by calling voters, you can also sign up there, and we'll send you all the information you need. And yeah, so just spread the word as much as possible. I would also really like to highlight that I am a part of a national coalition of people that are running across the country. So even if you're not in California or in our district, wherever you are, look into the races that are happening in your district, and whether that be for Congress, state house, state senate, local races are all so important. And it's so important that we as voters demand these changes by constantly participating in our elections and doing research into the candidates. Don't just take for granted that, hey, this is the incumbent, so they must be fine, let me just vote for them. Actually look into who's challenging, what other potential options there are is so important in our democracy.
Yeah.
So
Critical this year to really look into the candidates, make sure they represent your values, make sure they're ready for this fight. And Hunter Miranda, you've convinced me that you are. I think you're fabulous. Our first attorney, I'm eating crow because I think you are going to be a fantastic Congress member. Seth, final words for Hunter?
Hunter, again, thank you so much for the time. Really impressed with you, man. And I'm just, hoping that, all your hard work comes out to something good, man, because clearly you know what you're doing. You're involved in your community. And even though California's a big and blue, clearly we're going to have to continue our work in California with everything else that's going on across the country. So again, thank you so much for the time.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you. I'm so appreciative and grateful to be here. And again, like I said, the work y'all do is so important and needed. So keep it up, keep up the good work, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Hunter.
Yeah,
It's been a real pleasure. And we'll keep our eye on you. And if you need anything, you're a friend of the show now. You can come back at any time. Just let us know.
absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
All right. Bye, Hunter. Thank you.
Well, Ali, we just got done talking with Hunter Miranda, and I mean, an extremely impressive individual.
Mhm.
You know, really cares about his community. And obviously, a millennial, always giving points for that.
I
And
know.
it's just that we love to see the younger generation take up the mantle, understand, prioritizing the right things. And I think that we just found out that Hunter's another guy that has his priorities in order. Again, not going to take PAC money, grassroots guy. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about giving the Democratic Party a facelift while
Yeah.
also kicking MAGA to the side of the road.
And those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
We can reform this party and shape it into the party of the future that's going to be actually beneficial for all Americans while kicking the shit out of MAGA. And guess what? If we reform this party, we'll be continuing to kick the shit out of the Republican Party for time immemorial. This is what we need to do. This is the direction the party has to move to. Hear that, DNC? We're talking to you.
Yep.
Get on board because this is
Right.
where we're going.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hunter, remarkable. Love that he has taken all of this knowledge, his law degree, given back to his community in any way that he can, making himself available to his community members. Great conversation, excellent candidate.
Yeah, we need guys like that to be like the face of the new Democratic Party. I
We
mean,
really
we are
do.
not going to sit back anymore. I was so glad to hear that he was on board with being aggressive, doing what it takes to respond to the undemocratic ways of these red states and what they are doing to try to wrest power or keep power, what little sliver they have left. I mean, we need guys like
Shameful.
him who are we're thinking we're thinking into the future. We're completely different. We're being aggressive, and he's on board with that. So I love it.
That's what we need. Christina Aguilera, if we had the money, we'd be playing a little fighter right now. But
Yeah.
we're not quite there yet, but we carry on, we sojourn on. Seth,
Yeah.
that was so much fun. Love that guy. We've got another interview coming up this week. And we might do some news this week, and then we have another interview scheduled for after that. So interviews are starting to pick up, guys. We're excited about it. We're
Yep.
so pumped to keep bringing you these really high quality, progressive, grassroots candidates. I hope you're enjoying it. And I guess I'll see you next time.
Yes, indeed. Primary season is heating up.
Love it. Bye, Seth.